All right, I think we are all set. Julinna, do you want to just
Great.
go over what this is, and I'll introduce our guests.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to tonight's discussion with Grand Strand Action Together. We are here with two quote unquote young feminists, since I can no longer qualify as young. Ashlyn's
Not me.
medium young. But we are really excited to
Mm-mm.
talk about especially Gen Z and fourth wave feminism tonight. So we have two guest speakers who are going to talk with us tonight and give us the skinny on how feminism is working out for the younger generation in college these days. So Ashlyn, you want to introduce our guest?
Yeah, so we have Lily with us from Coastal Carolina University, and she is the president of her campus at that campus. I think, isn't it? It's kind of like a national thing. There's chapters all over the country. And Lily is majoring in English. And we have Grace, who was a co-founder of Birds and the Bees at CCU, majoring in interdisciplinary studies with a focus on sexual behavior. So I think we should do the fun question first. Julinna, you should probably know what the fun question is.
Which fun? Oh, what is the Birds and the Bees Club?
No. Put them on the spot and ask them who their favorite person throughout history is for feminism and women's rights.
All right. Yeah, we're just going to pitch on the spot and launch right in. So who gives you inspiration and who inspires you as a feminist?
Favorite person in all of history? That is a very loaded question. But I tend to go for a couple of feminist women that I find to be very powerful. Bell Hooks is one of them. I think that a lot of her work is extremely foundational. It's iconic for intersectionality and intersectional feminism. And I also, another just classic feminist is Audre Lorde for me, and a lot of her poetry and her work, including The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House is an incredible radical feminist poem, and I really use their works as a lot for guidance.
Awesome. That's a great answer. Those are two
good answers.
Yeah, for sure. How about you, Lily?
I'm going to go more for the modern day side of things, but I really love Stacey Abrams and AOC, which is like right there, same type of conversation around both of them. AOC, completely unexpected win for the House. I don't know if anyone's seen her documentary, Knock Down the House, but absolutely amazing story, from server and bartender, which is, I'm a server now, to being in the House of Representatives. And nobody expected it. They didn't even see her as competition, and she showed them, right? And then Stacey Abrams, after losing an election, continued the fight for someone else to win. And I just think that speaks so truly to her character. And I love that. So.
Definitely good answers. Yeah. Julinna, did you see that documentary?
I haven't seen the documentary yet.
No. Okay. Well, you have to stop this right now and go watch it. It's really, really good. No, I cried. I cried whenever I saw it.
Wow.
So that's definitely good answers. Yeah, it's powerful. It's powerful. And Cori Bush is actually in it as well.
Who's in it, Ashlyn?
Yes. So I don't know, Julinna, what's the answer for you? What?
Ooh, my favorite feminist. I mean,
Cori Bush.
Cori Bush.
Did you hear that?
Yes, is she from Missouri, right? Sorry. Yeah, we have little.
Yes, ma'am.
Glitching out on
Yes. Yes, she's from Missouri. But yeah, you could answer the same question.
So I'm going to give some weird answers to that. So one of my favorite people is Mary Wollstonecraft. She's a feminist philosopher who is writing in the late 1700s. And her book was called A Vindication of the Rights of Women. And while she was writing her, women didn't have any rights. As soon as they got married, they lost their right. They were like subsumed under their husband's names. They lost their property. They no longer had any rights. And so she refused to get married and had a partner, another philosopher thinking outside the box, of course, William Godwin. And they had a very famous daughter who you probably know is Mary Shelley. So Mary Wollstonecraft is just one of my favorite feminists to read as a philosopher. So I totally dig her. And I just still love Gloria Steinem. I mean, I know she's a amazing old white lady right now, but I still absolutely love her. I still absolutely love Gloria Steinem. Ashlyn, do you want to answer that question?
Sure. Sure. So I would have to say Carrie Fisher. Carrie Fisher is amazing to me. She is just a badass she refused to be apologetic for aging, for her mental health issues. And other than that, I just have a deep infatuation with Angela Davis. So those would be my two.
Love Angela Davis too, who I met at a women's and gender studies conference several years ago and got my picture taken with her. That's like going in my grave. So
yes. That was before I moved here. So I'm super jealous.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It was like, I think 2014. It's been some years, but definitely one of the highlights of my life. We were all like fangirling around her. It was
I believe it.
Was,
oh man. So something that we definitely seem to notice, and not just in this area, but across the country, is like the older generation refusing to give up power and like pass the torch to the younger generation. So really what we want to know is, what do you think the future is for the feminist movement? How would you define it, and where do you think it's going? And either one of you can go.
Sorry, I jumped for it. I think intersectionality, I know that's not necessarily new to us, but I think that we're taking it very seriously. Grace and I actually had a conversation about this the other day, where even us, like even Gen Z, fourth wave feminists, we recognize that we don't recognize everything, right? So a lot of times when we go off to say like, oh, well, these are the barriers for people, we say race, gender, class, and sexuality. And a lot of people still forget to say ability or disability, and rural or urban area, and a lot of different things that I feel like we recognize that we don't have all the answers, and we're really open to not having all the answers.
Right. I like that.
Yeah, I totally agree with Lily on that. I think that being able to take critiques is a huge thing that has been lacking in the feminist movement for a long time, especially from groups that have felt excluded from the movement. So I think that being able to know that we don't know everything is huge. And something else that I'm seeing, and I do have a lot of friends that identify as radical. And I think that language is interesting. I don't necessarily believe that a lot of their morals and their beliefs are this radical agenda. I think they're very rooted in morals and morality, humanity for other people. But something that I'm also seeing with representation in politics and in women is that representation in and of itself was such a powerful symbol and still is, but that we also want to see those people working for us.
Right.
And a lot of times I think that's viewed as this radical thing for not instantly supporting, someone in politics who's a person of color, who's a woman. But I think it is important to also acknowledge that we don't only want that representation. It was a great step, and we still want to keep pushing that, but we also need the focus of those people to be on the right things. Because there are still people in groups that oppress people in their own groups. So I think that's a huge fourth wave ideal too, is to not jump immediately to saying, oh, hooray, we have representation, but to dig deeper and ask those questions before we're willing to openly support anyone. And I think that's a good thing for politics.
I like that too. I think that's definitely what I've been seeing lately, especially when we went over the whole presidential primaries. Things got a little tense and a little heated between different age groups. But I think that policy is going to be more and more at the forefront. And Julinna, don't you agree?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think that the other thing about representation is I think we're also realizing that like one is not enough, right? So we're moving past tokenism and really saying we need like a diversity of voices, like among people who have not been traditionally sort of represented by things and who have some sort of, like a minority status that like we need to know more about. I think that the thing that I've learned probably the most in the last couple of years is just like, we need the diversity among, all the different, types of experiences that people have, because it's just not enough, right? To have like, a token Black woman or a token Black man or something like that on a committee or serving in an office, because then you've reduced that person to a stereotype, and it's just totally unfair, right, to everybody.
Right. I hear you. I hear you. Well, let's see, what else do we have here? Where would you like to go next, Julinna?
Oh, I'm kind of curious about how you guys got interested in feminism. So
Yeah, your backgrounds. Where did you come from?
like how did you get into it? Like I have a daughter who's like, I think now I've inadvertently trained her to recognize racism and sexism at every turn. So somebody will give her like an Oxford classic book and she'll be like, there's no people of color in here. Like, what's the problem? You know, like this is supposed to be
You're doing a good job.
part of the, you know, white supremacy. And I'm like, oh, I trained her too good, you know? So anyway, so how did you guys end up interested in feminism?
I think it was a variety of things for me. A lot of it when I was school age, so still in middle and high school. I remember one thing that really seemed wrong to me and I couldn't understand where it was coming from a young age was dress codes at school. So they were always about me, right? They were always about what I'm doing wrong. And it wasn't like I was, you know, coming to school really wearing something like out of this world. It was like I couldn't have holes in my jeans. And you ask, you're like, why can't I wear the only thing I can find in the store? So they're always about me. Why do I have to go out of my way to find clothes that fit this weird standard? And it's so you don't distract the boys in class. And like, that makes no sense to me. Why can't they take care of themselves and I just wear clothes? And then at the same time, I remember every school year after the summer was over, I'd have to go to the store and go school shopping again. And every pair of jeans I could find had holes in them. You know, all of the shirts were tank tops or spaghetti straps or crop tops because it's South Carolina, it's 100 degrees outside, you know, and that's all they sell. I'm going all around myself, and every day at school, I ended up basically wearing long jeans with no holes and a t-shirt, like standard dress code every day because nothing else fit it. And I remember being so frustrated because like our school hallways didn't have air conditioning. I also grew up in a really rural, like poor school district. So it's 85 degrees in the hallway and I'm sweating all day long. You know, I go into my classes and I'm not even thinking about anything. So I might not be distracting them, right? But I'm distracting myself. And why is that fair? And then when I was in high school, I was taking IB classes, which is supposed to be some like high standard, like really global vision, intersectional. And, you know, props to them because they are more advanced than a lot of education. But in every unit for history class, there would be like 3 to 5 pages at the end of the chapter. It's like women, minorities, and culture. Like, this is what you get for yourself, minority. And we talked about, you know, everything else the past 50 pages, but these 5 were giving you your representation. That's enough, right? And I was really
take your scraps. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so for my like big project for IB, I did the feminist movement of the 60s and 70s, and I talked about how music and literature like shape change. And I had this guy that sat behind me in class every day that was like, oh God, I'm behind the feminist, right? And he was just on my case about everything every day. And I just was like, this is ridiculous. You know, you have to learn nothing about women's history. You read these 3 to 5 pages and you think that I'm so absurd because while I'm sweating in my long pants and t-shirt, I'm a little bit frustrated that there's nothing in here of value to me. And so then I came to college and my advisor offered me a women and gender studies class for my elective first semester. And that was the first time I knew that like something like this existed, right? And I joined a women and gender studies club on campus. And I was like, wow, like there are people in the world who actually appreciate this and they see the need for it too. Like I'm not just the weird feminist in class. And so here I am today, the weird feminist. I'm okay with it though. I think it's worked out.
You're in a good group of people. That's the great thing about coming to college is that you find people who are like-minded and who have similar interests and who have recognized their experiences. And you're like, okay, I found my people.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome that it started that young for you. Definitely did not start that young for me. Julinna, I know you're kind of.
I have
you have a weird background, just like me.
Yeah, I have a weird background. But my mom is real strong, and I mean, I was raised to like think that like girls could do everything that boys can, And so, for example, my dad had me like up on the roof helping him repair, dig out the gutters and things at age 5. And that's not normal for a 5-year-old of any gender. But I was always treated kind of like as the oldest son. So it's kind of strange that like there was never any conception that like I was going to be like a housewife. My parents were like, you don't get married, make sure you follow your career and, all these things. So it's kind of not I wasn't gendered in, the way that women typically were of my age, but I think, both of my mom's a psychologist. So I have sort of big shoes to fill in terms of like what, and, my mom's very much, I guess you would probably say, first or second wave feminist in those terms, but it's been an interesting experience. I think I always had feminist ideas about the world and never really knew that I needed to attach the word feminist to it though, until I got to college, that's for sure. So, and that's when I was like, as soon as I heard about feminist epistemology, I was like, oh yeah, I'm all over that. So I was very excited.
That sounds a lot like my experience. I think I had a lot of the beliefs associated with feminist ideology kind of ingrained into me very early. My mother is an academic, and she has a PhD in education, and she was a communications professor when I was a kid at an HBCU for most of my childhood. So I was raised around a lot of people of color. She took a lot of feminist courses when she was in college. So I didn't really know what was normal or not normal to have experience-wise, I think, until I got to college. But I also, had those counter experiences where I don't think I knew a out queer person until I came to college either. And being an identifying queer person, that was also a very interesting thing to go through. So I think I had a lot of those background ideas for a long time. And my older sister is 26, and she's in her PhD program for psychology and was a women and gender studies minor. So I didn't really think I was going to go to college when I graduated high school. And then I worked in a diner for a year and decided that I wanted to study sex. So I did. And my sister told me to take a women and gender studies class, and I probably was going to anyway. But I took my first intro class with Dr. Ina C. Thaler, the director of the department, Women and Gender Studies department at CCU. And I think I was extremely humbled by that class. I think I kind of thought I had it all figured out. And I think that was the first time I really had to like outwardly acknowledge privilege and oppression, and what I have, the privilege that I have, and the ways I've I'm being oppressed and what that means, and to actually say it out loud and have the language for it, instead of just knowing that something's going on that you don't really know how to talk about it. So I kind of had that same experience, and I think after that first class I went ahead and declared the minor, and I'm angry that I'm very, very happy that they got a women and gender studies major put through, but it's beginning next semester as I'm graduating. So I would have been in that if possible. And I think these women and gender studies courses are incredible tools for that. The intro classes are really, really cool. So that was a huge eye opener for me, that I had a hell of a lot more to learn before I could consider myself educated in any way.
Yeah.
Right. So with everything you're learning at school, and then the organizations that you're both a part of and are running, what issues would you say you're organizing around, either in our community or specifically on your campus?
I can go ahead and see.
Yeah.
We do a lot, especially since COVID. We have, many more in-person events we've had.
You can do pre and post-COVID if you want to give both answers.
A lot of discussions and consciousness raising types of events and Zoom meetings in the last year. But we talk a lot about sexual freedom and what that means in terms of bodily autonomy. And, that might mean medical care and access to abortion, but it also might mean being able to feel pleasure or being able to feel comfortable in your own body. So we do have those conversations in Birds and Bees. That's a huge part of what we do, is having these kind of stigmatized discussions and open conversations about different aspects of feminism or sexuality. We just had a meeting earlier today. There was the rhetoric behind sexual orientation labels. So we, we'll host meetings where we openly ask, do you think that bisexuality is an offensive term to people who identify as non-binary, and then open the floor. So a lot of it is critical analysis. And we also do other events on campus through Birds and Bees. Laura Lily can probably talk about this more too, but the Heartbeat Bill is something going on in South Carolina, and with right to abortions. And I know that her campus has been working with that a little bit. But we'll do, small protests / just putting up posters to spread awareness on campus. Also, when I could just go to classes, if professors would have to miss class, they would email us and we would just show up and do either an STI or birth control or sexual wellness presentation. So that is a lot of what we focus on as an organization, but we kind of tie in a lot of feminist values with that. We work a lot with students advocating for gender equality. SAGE on our campus is an incredible organization. And we try to just take those values and put them towards offering kind of education and that open space for people on this campus.
That's awesome. Definitely awesome.
Kind of like Grace said, at her campus, education is a big thing for us too. And I have a different lens on education, I guess you could say. I don't think it's always like in a classroom or in a presentation or like I talk, you listen, but we do a lot of written education. So we're an online magazine and we pay a lot of attention to like, what are we talking about? What's going on in the news? Who needs help? Who isn't being listened to? Like, what's an urgent issue? And we produce like anywhere from 5 to 10 articles every week. And some of them are relaxed, some of them are like Netflix movies to watch, but we also do really intense and heavy subjects. And last semester, especially with the election coming up, we did everything we could. Like we had an event to help people get registered to vote. We had a whole week talking about why you should vote and what voting means and the history of it and how women have fought for the right to vote. And then we had a whole week educating people on candidates. So like, here's Joe Biden. Here's his stance on every single subject we can find. And here's Donald Trump. And like, lay it all out. Who do you really want leading the country? And then we did the same with lower elected offices and things too. But like Grace said, we do philanthropies from time to time. So a couple of years ago, we did a Christmas present for everyone at a local women's homeless shelter. And then right now we're doing a t-shirt sale, a fundraiser for Planned Parenthood in South Carolina because they're going against the Heartbeat Bill. And so we really just have our eyes out, and there's about 20, 25 of us in the group, and we're all paying attention all the time, right? Everyone is so amazing. Like everyone in this group is the best people I've ever met in my life. And they all come every week so into it, so caring. They're like, what can we do next? And like I said, some of it's relaxed too. We're not always like out fighting for change, but pretty much every week someone is, right? And sometimes we get a break. But together we really highlight on all the issues. So it's awesome.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm excited that exists at Coastal.
Yeah. Me too.
So I'm from Pittsburgh, so I'm not a Southerner. I've been here since 2016, and Pennsylvania is kind of like a weird mix of like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and then everything in the middle might as well be South Carolina. It's all super rural. So moving from an actual liberal city, coming here in the beginning was kind of a little bit of a change for me, but I have been plugged in ever since. And the one thing that I've noticed is that I didn't really see a lot of younger people doing much at the time, like back in 2016. I know one of my friends, her younger sister was trying to lead like a feminist club at high school and had problems finding like a teacher who would, be their sponsor, and then had problems finding students to attend. So I guess my question would be, and Julinna, feel free to add on to this when I'm done. what do you think needs to happen in this area for young people to kind of come on board with what we're doing?
Well, I don't think it's just young people here either.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, young people definitely a problem and easier to reach, I would say. But with everyone, I think a lot of our problem as feminists, and it is our burden to carry, in my opinion, is that we aren't meeting people where they're at. We get frustrated really easily, and I am a very frustrated natured person, right? So when someone says something that's just super wrong, my gut reaction is like, how dare you say that? How dare you believe that? But at the same time, like when people are raised with a set of beliefs, it's extremely hard to hear one person disagree with you and be like, oh yeah, you're probably right, and I've been wrong for 16 years or 25 years or 40 years, you know? And I think sometimes we know what words scare people off. We know like feminist will scare some people off if they aren't one. But if we educate ourselves to be like, okay, maybe I won't introduce it to you as you should be a feminist. Maybe I'll say, I think it's a problem that 1 in 6 women are a victim of rape or attempted rape. Don't you agree? You know what I mean? And most people probably aren't going to disagree with you on that. And then you say, well,
Right.
I believe that we need to do something to stop this issue. And you can do that with every issue, right? I'm just using that as an example. But a lot of people have been taught to believe that we're these scary, progressive, radical, like people that are
Hating men,
yeah,
burning bras.
exactly. And so we have to show them like that's not who we are. But if we show them with an angry reaction at the forefront, they're gonna walk away. You know, and that's the easy thing for us to do, is to get angry and bitter because we're already very into this and angry about it, or we wouldn't be feminists, right? But
Right.
we have to acknowledge that not everybody can start where we're at right now. We didn't even start here, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, me and Lily have talked about cancel culture a little bit and our feelings about that. And I think I go really back and forth, and I have a hard time kind of solidifying how I feel about it. Because I do think that people deserve a chance, you know, if they make a mistake or if they say something offensive, deserve a chance to educate themselves. And I also believe that I owe people nothing, and that I shouldn't have to teach people how to speak to me with respect. So it is a frustrating combination of that, where I know that calling someone out instantly is probably not going to change their opinion, but it will get them out of my face. But taking the time to try to use that different language potentially, or, you know, working with people, it is a better way to get someone to understand what you're saying and potentially take it with them. And it is more exhausting. So, you know, there is that give and take too of the responsibility that feminists have. Of is it your responsibility or not to do that in every case, or to, you know, to call someone out, or to, you know, have someone to cancel someone if they make that mistake. And I think that we can go both ways with that, because I also think that canceling someone or online and taking away their platform can be a huge symbol of cultural change. And I think that as like, it's abstract, and that's where I also struggle with the how can we get people to take feminism seriously. I have a lot of the big ideas figured out, not as much of the actual implementing strategies portion. But I think changing the cultural norms, trying to do that one step at a time by holding people accountable for their actions is one thing. If people know that they can make comments, or, you know, not offer the correct, you know, rights and access to resources to their female employees or whatever it might be, they're going to keep doing it. You know, if we make feminine or anti-women jokes funny, people are going to keep saying them if we laugh. So I think that taking the small steps to call people out, to being willing to put yourself in that position, to have a little bit of pushback put onto you. It's not always fun, but it is important if you want to see the kind of general culture change. And I think that's a long-term goal. But I do have a hard time, you know, the short answer is I don't know, to get people more interested.
Right.
But I also, as much as I say I owe people nothing, I tend to try to lead with empathy and saying that, you know, all feminist issues and intersectional issues have something to do with you or someone you love. So if you have empathy of any kind, then you should be interested in this. And I try to hope that that kind of makes people question for a second whether or not they should care. But I think that is something we really struggle with on campus and something that Dr. Ina C. Valor has told me many times, that there are so many people who have taken enough women and gender studies classes to have the minor, but don't want it. That they would, even though it's just an added minor to your diploma, but having that minor is just the symbolism of that in and of itself. They don't want that. So it is something that we're working on that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've seen it rebranded in like the online feminist space from cancel culture to accountability culture. And I like that. But so when we talk about it, it's interesting because we all don't have the same belief or opinion on what to do with like punishment. So some people are, for abolition and some people are for reform. So if we're for abolition, then do we actually believe in cancel culture and that it will work, or is there something better? So that's something that it floats around in my mind more often than I would like to admit, because I haven't quite figured out where I stand. I'm somewhere in between reforming the criminal justice system and then abolition with certain things. So when you're looking for people to learn and grow, are we punishing them or are we trying to help them?
Yeah, I think something important that I try to go back to is a lot of times the people who are not understanding of difference are people who are also like their identity markers have taken them there, right? So a lot of times people who don't understand how things impact others and don't impact them, they may be lower class and have never been able to travel out of their area. They may have had a public education that was lower, like funded less, and they didn't have any classes other than your general math, science, whitewash history, and English, right? So they didn't have anyone. And I told Grace the other day, I was like, sometimes I feel like, once you get so old, you should know better. Like once you get older, once you're an adult. And I said, but when I got older, I moved and I went to college. I was in a different town. I met new people. I met people from different backgrounds. So yeah, I'm older. I know better, right? But when you stay in this area, maybe you got a job straight out of high school, you never left. You were around the same people that agree with you. So why does getting older mean you should know better? And it is frustrating. And I agree with Grace that like it's not our responsibility. I don't think it's the common person's responsibility, right? So I think if someone's sexist towards me, it's not my responsibility to tell them like, hey, that's wrong. Like you should do better and this is why. But if I'm an activist or if I'm a feminist, then I think it is, right? Because I wear that label because in my mind, I won't change. So if I won't change, I have to be a change maker. And that is uncomfortable sometimes, unfortunately, but that's kind of what I've signed myself up for. So I don't think I walk away once like I don't like it anymore,
Well, we have a couple questions from people watching on Facebook. So let's see here. Where is the first one? The first one's from Ashley, and she wants to ask both of you, what do y'all want your predecessors and elders to know about? What should we read about and educate ourselves on to be the best resources and advocates for your work?
I think that it's most important we start looking at things we aren't looking at all. And I know that's like such a vague answer, but I'm still going. So we have a lot of people, like I was saying earlier, talking about gender, race, class, sexuality. We should not leave that behind, right? We need to keep working on that. We are not equal in any of those playing fields. But we need a lot of people focused on rural versus urban. What barriers does that create? And when we look at those two areas, a lot of the other identity markers are there too, right? And why is that the case? We need people looking more at citizenship status than we are right now. Definitely. We need people looking at religion and nationality. And what is that doing to people? What difference does that make with us? So I would say, like, I do think we're doing a good job, the majority of us, trying to advance ourselves in a lot of areas, but there are a lot of things that just constantly fall by the wayside. Ability status too, which I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I agree with Lily on that. And I think that's something that's been important for me in being an intersectional feminist, which I think is most important for women and people of the dominant race, for white people, to really work to be intersectional. And part of that is acknowledging that some of your beloved historical figures were not perfect. And I think that that's very hard for a lot of people. And it will be hard for me too someday, when the people I currently love, when I find out that they weren't perfect either. But there's a show, Shameless, is a very popular show right now. And one of the actresses in the show was just walking around with a shirt that said, the suffragettes were racist, but you should still vote. And I thought that was hilarious and awesome. And I think it's just that we need to acknowledge that we can accept the small victories and keep moving forward, but we can't glorify these groups of people who completely forgot about other groups of people, or who intentionally chose not to include them. And I think that's an incredibly important acknowledgement for older generations, and also for our generation to know that we can't just idolize people that are fed to us in history books, because it is whitewashed. There are a lot of people we don't learn about. There's a lot of, I didn't know that Stonewall even existed until I got to college. And so to know that there, like Lily said, there's a lot of places that we haven't even scratched the surface and beginning to look. And when we're speaking of women of color, we're not only talking about Black women. There's our specific levels of oppression that happen to Asian women and Native American women, and we need to acknowledge the differences in these groups, and not say women and mean middle-class white women, because that happens very frequently in feminist spaces, especially historically in very significant feminist spaces. And I think that a huge part of Gen Z feminism, and just essential part of any white woman's feminism, is to acknowledge that and try their very best not to repeat those mistakes.
Yeah, I want to add on to what I said earlier too. So one thing I wish everybody, because I just told Grace about it the other day, I learned this past year and Grace didn't know yet, go look up the Capitol crawl. And it was an ability rights protest where people of different abilities crawled up the steps of the United States Capitol to demand access to ramps. So it's this big visual movement of like, how are we supposed to get into buildings, even our own Capitol building, if you don't give us what we need to get there? And like, it was a debate whether or not they should pass this bill, which is just absurd to me. And so these people crawled up the steps of the Capitol, and many of them were arrested for crawling up the steps of the Capitol, right? And that was, I can't remember the exact date, but it was like the 90s or early 2000s, like very recent, way more recent than it should have been. And so when I look at that and I see that they were arrested and everyone was like, oh, these bad, evil protesters, like stirring up trouble, I'm like, we have not learned anything. Like, this just keeps happening, right? And so I feel like when we look at situations like that and we look at history, we can acknowledge, like, yes, we've made some steps forward, but we also need to say, like, in some ways we haven't changed anything at all, which is really sad. And how do we acknowledge that and not let it keep happening another 30 or 40 years?
Yeah, that is some stuff right there. I actually, so you would think, being that we're in 2021, this didn't happen this year, so maybe like 2 or 3 years ago, my apartment over at Palmetto Point finally put a ramp in to where people dispose of their trash. Before it was just stairs. So kind of curious how that worked beforehand. Don't really know. I remember the news covered it. Like, it was a pretty big thing. I was like, why are all these news cameras around here? What's going on? And then they're building this ramp. So yeah, I think that's things that those of us who don't have certain issues take for granted. We don't really realize like how privileged we are to be able to just walk up a set of stairs and throw away our garbage.
Right.
No, I'm going to say just Horry County is horrific with respect to this issue. I mean, the ADA was passed a long time ago, And we still have access problems on campus and
Mhm.
city buildings, and there's no sidewalks. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like they're intentionally, oh, I mean, it's not the system, right? The
Mhm.
built environment around us is intentionally blind, right? And not even, well, maybe that's not the best word to use, right? But like it's failing to take into account differently abled people. So it's yeah, there've been changes. I mean, I think I've been in Horry County now for way longer than I anticipated being here, like 15 years. So things have improved a lot.
But slowly.
Slowly,
Slowly.
very slowly. Yeah.
Mhm.
And with it takes a lot of effort, right? So you get burnt
Mhm.
out. But yeah.
So Jensen has a question. They said, do you think the prevalence of the internet these days has direct impact on the fourth wave of feminism? So just jump on in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And looking at feminism as an intersectional topic, we can look at this past summer, right? The video of George Floyd and the activism that sparked everywhere, not even in the country, right? Around the world. And it begs the question of like, what would have happened if there wasn't a video? You know, like, would we have known? Would things have progressed? Would we have had all of these protests? Would anything have changed with the Black Lives Matter movement at all? You know, would anyone care? Would anyone pay attention? Even if it was just a news headline on the TV, like, would it still draw the same amount of energy? And I think that we have a lot of, Grace called it earlier, consciousness raising, just day to day on our social media feeds. I do think that there's a lot to be said for also our algorithms and how they tailor to us. So unfortunately, I feel like a lot of the times people who aren't already interested and people who don't already care, their algorithm kind of weeds it out for them. And I don't know how we push back against that. But I do think that for people actively trying to make a difference, it's very helpful to be able to constantly like be in contact with other people that have different ideas.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's one of the huge benefits of the internet in general for communication about anything, is that it's much largely more largely widespread than it ever was before. So people are able to acknowledge, you know, issues that are going on in places other than exactly where they are, or in groups other than people that they have their personal experience with, and are able to actually pay attention and hear and try to understand what's going on and you know, take action. I also think that we do have the rise of this social media activism trend that is something that's interesting. And I think that's also something that, you know, is a double bind, and you can look at it at both sides. That you know, the Black Square was a huge point of, you know, of contention, I guess, that people were posting the Black Square to represent Black Lives Matter movement and their support, and blacking out, you know, all of the Instagram pages with all of those. And, you know, I had people on both sides saying, you know, that is how you show support. And someone that said, if that's the only thing I see on your Instagram having anything to do with this issue or anything else, then I don't believe it. And I think that is something that's important to acknowledge, that because of the internet also, I think that certain levels of activism have become a trend for many people, where they want to seem involved without actually doing the work. And that can have its own benefits and its own symbolic meaning, to have, you know, a full page being dedicated to people saying that they're in support of this movement. But it also it is important to define activism in that way, and to kind of to put in more work than just a post or just consciousness raising. I think that that's very, very second wave feminism too, which is frustrating with COVID, that's pretty much all that we can do right now is educate. And it's a great tool, but going further than that, I think is important, and taking more steps. But I do think that all in all, the social media and the internet has been incredibly beneficial. You know, there's all kinds of Instagram people for the body positivity movement, and, you know, anti-slut shaming, and letting women explore, you know, their own bodies. And I think that maybe wouldn't have happened for a lot of people if they didn't have connections through social media and the internet. So I think that large portions of the movement have, like, essentially, you know, begun and progressed solely because of the internet, while as others maybe aren't getting enough attention and are just getting posts. So I think that that's double-sided.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Julinna, how do you feel about that? See, I half grew up with the internet as a 31-year-old. I had AOL dial-up, so you being a little bit older than me did not.
Yeah, I mean, I world that this is embarrassing. No, like I didn't have email in college. Like that tells you like how old I was. Like I
Go get a
think
drink.
email right, exactly. I think email was maybe invented like while I was an undergrad. I had one friend in college who had an email account and he went to the computer lab, like once a week and would email his friend in Sweden, which was like, I was just like, why would you, like, what's the point of that? Like, why would you do this? And it's like, there's no other way to communicate with that person quickly. And I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, if you know somebody in Sweden, email, that's something that makes sense. And then like by the time I got to graduate school, like a year or two later, I had an email account. And so I had to learn how to use it and everything. So the like full on internet, like the World Wide Web, like I have friends who are nerds and who knew about the World Wide Web, like right before, like when I first got going, but I didn't have a clue. It's
okay, so
world. It has changed the world. I mean, I feel like I'm not even in the same world that I was like 20 years ago.
It is funny too. I mean, you say internet, in my mind kind of went immediately to social media. It's not even the internet.
Yeah, not Google.
Y'all are like,
yes.
like, oh, she's so old. You're like, social media, that's what we're talking about.
No, but like a real question though is like, obviously there was tons of organizing in the 50s, 60s, 70s, in the 80s, but I just don't understand how it happened. So how did you talk to other feminists or organizers, political activists, whatever?
Yeah, like magazines. Like that was the way that's the predominant mode or method that feminists used to communicate back then was zine culture. I mean, so that was a thing. So I could walk in like downtown Athens and you see these like totally like offbeat random little magazines and they'll have like, little flyers or little, events in them, but everything was slow. It's slow going. I mean, that's it. It is the speed with which you hear about things. You had to read the newspaper or hear the news at night or read and my parents read magazines, right? If you don't encounter magazines, then like you would never, hear about any of these things. So yeah, no, I mean, it's word of mouth. It's who you know. And now, I mean, this is the thing that just astounds me about living today is that like, if you don't know the answer to something, you can find out within a matter of seconds. Like that's a game changer. It is an utter game changer to know that like we have all this information at our fingertips. Now it may not be packaged in the right way. That doesn't tell us like we know all the stories that there are to know about the world, but like you can research things and you can find data and you can do this stuff and like, anyway, I don't know. It's amazing to me. Like, but it makes organizing totally different. You don't have to have a phone tree. So anyway.
Changing pace a little bit, we have a question from Zan. And Zan wants to know how any of you, myself, maybe even, differentiate ourselves from TERFs and how do we kind of like remove, just stay away from that sort of ideology within the feminist movement. And for anyone who doesn't know what TERF means, it's a trans exclusionary radical feminist. I don't even like that they have the word radical in their name because I feel like that is just not very radical. So that's the question. And we can start with Grace, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, I honestly, I don't have that much experience with like the term TERF and talking to people with that particular ideology, but I do think that having the term radical in there is very interesting. But I think in general that a lot of feminism is about choice, and that's not to say that has anything to do with being transgender, but it has to do with tolerance in general. And I think that a lot of people fail to do that, if that makes sense. To just understand that different people have different experiences and that your experience is not going to match the experiences of every other woman and every other person and every other, and being able to accept that instead of trying to make general statements and blanket statements about these groups that you know nothing about. But I would also love to know more about what you all have to say about that as well, because I would say I think that's something I definitely need to work on more.
What about you, Lily?
I would say that since we are seeing feminism as intersectional, there's no room for someone to be feminist whatsoever if they're exclusionary, right? And so that goes for people who exclude the trans community, people who exclude any of the long list of identity markers I was railing off earlier. You can't be a feminist and ignore a large group of people who need like attention right now and who need help and who need to be like progressed into the future, and people who have identity markers that are holding them down and structures against them. Because the ideology of being a feminist is being someone who thinks everyone is equal and everyone deserves to be treated with respect and everyone deserves equity. So I would say there's no room for them here, but at the same time, if I encountered one, I would be willing to have a conversation. Like I said earlier, that weight on my shoulders, it's like, since I'm a feminist, I feel the need to be willing to talk to you and to be willing to say, well, why do you feel that way? And like work on education rather than automatically like, get out my face, never talk to me again,
Yeah, I just to add on real quick, I just think I had a hard time answering that question too, just because.
I'm sorry, I put you on the spot.
Oh, it's okay. I just don't think I even really understand how anyone can identify with that. And I don't know if I've even met anyone who really does, or who, so I guess it's just, it sounds, like reading it out, trans exclusionary radical feminist makes no sense to me. So I guess that's how I would answer that too, is that it,
right,
like Lily said, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Now, before Julinna can school us on this, because she
know.
probably has all the academic, up in her head, what I've encountered is when I get, and I'm not a trans person, so let me just say, whenever I've made posts in support of trans people, whenever I've been trolled, it's always been people from England and Australia. It has not ever been anyone from the United States, not from Canada. I don't know if that's reflective overall. I mean, obviously there's going to be trans exclusionary people everywhere, but it was fascinating to me that it always was those two countries. And clearly, we see the whole thing with J.K. Rowling constantly making herself worse and worse and worse. So it is out there. And, I think a lot of the people who are anti-trans, I wouldn't consider them feminists. I agree with you. I don't know why they feel the need to take that label. It doesn't fit them, and I don't want them.
Yeah. I mean, Ashlyn, you touched on one of the important points. Someone told me at one point something about the origin of why there's so many TERFy people in the UK and in Australia, and it's escaping me right now, but it has something to do with like the development of the feminist movement, like the particular like kind of offshoot that it sort of engendered. From what I understand, so there's one woman in philosophy who is sort of beating this issue, and she's what we would call a TERF. Their new term that they're calling themselves these days are gender critical feminist. And I think that they want to get away from the exclusionary part because they don't want to be seen as excluding people. And so they want to be critical though of the concept of gender, and especially, trans people. But it's a real problem. I think it's just going to get exacerbated. I think that over the next couple of years, because now this issue is more in the public, the Equality Act, which was wonderful, is a wonderful act, and it was passed by the House. You have a lot of people who haven't taken a women's and gender studies class. They don't know the difference between sex, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, none of that stuff, right? So then they don't even know, they don't understand the concept of the binary and why the binary is problematic. They have never read, the 5 sexes, right? So there's, I think there's just going to be more and more heat on this particular issue until there can be more education. I've had a number of people contact me since the equality bill was passed, and they're like, hey, what's the problem? So I have a lot of people who are like, everybody's in an outcry about this bill. I don't understand what the problem is. Like, what are they upset about? And they know that, like, it seems like there's something to be upset about, but they also don't understand trans issues, right? They don't get it there. And then they get upset about the whole sports thing. So I have a colleague who this is their research area, and they write prolifically on this topic. And so my goal is to just spread, their work to educate people on this topic. And I think it's going to take, 5 years to get people fully on board. I'm not sure whether the bill will pass. The good thing about the bill being out there now is that we can have the conversations. That's my opinion of this. So
another thing, I'm sorry. Another thing I'll say is a lot of people who may term themselves as this version of feminist, I notice people don't care about feminist issues at all until they find something to disagree with sometimes. So I think that's why we see the Save Women's Sports Act. They were not saving women's sports when the women's soccer team was getting paid a lot less than the men's, right? I never heard an outcry about that. So is it really about saving women's sports, or is it really about being exclusionary, but doing it in an inclusive way? And we see that too with Black Lives Matter. Oh, well, all lives matter. Well, if all lives matter, like, why does that offend you? And why aren't you fighting for all lives, right? And I think we can say the same thing. Well, like, oh, are they activists because they believe everyone matters? I mean, they're only saying that to combat something that's actually working on an issue. So no, I think it's a very slick tactic to cause problems, but I don't think they're truly doing what they're saying they are.
Yeah, that's a good point, because if you are trying to portray yourself as, like, I don't know, some sort of warrior for women, are you doing anything about sexual assault, or no? Are you holding any sort of consent talks, any discussions on consent? I'm pretty positive that almost every single college across the country has a huge rape culture problem. So what are you doing about that? Or you're just trying to be rude, exclusionary, and discriminating against other people?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like to me. Without having too much experience, I think that I tend to surround myself with very trans inclusive people. So it was a term that I've heard the word TERF and the term TERF, and I think I didn't actually know exactly what it meant, but I just kind of made my own definition. So when you said it out loud, it made me have to actually sit there and think about it. And then it was like, wait, well, of course that makes no sense. You can't be a radical feminist and not have support for trans people and not know the difference between sex and gender, and then be able to convey that information. So yeah, I just think that's not real. And if you're trans exclusionary, then you are not a feminist.
It kind of seems that way. So y'all, I just looked at the time. We've been on for about an hour. Ashlyn, do we have one last question that we want to
I think
wrap
so.
up with?
I think so. I'm just making sure that no one in the Facebook has a question that went unanswered.
Okay.
Let's see here. So Jenny asked a question, but I think it was already discussed maybe before she joined.
So I have one last question, Ashlyn.
Go for it. Yes.
So this is something that I think is real important, and I think about a lot. What do you feel like the role of men is in the feminist movement? And I ask that because I feel like there's always been men allies who have been throughout history helping women. So John Stuart Mill and Harriet Taylor wrote a book, The Subjection of Women, in the 1800s to change the laws, right, in England, which were disenfranchising women. So there always have been allies. I feel like, I'm not going to lie, your generation of dudes who are being, raised as men seem really amazing. They seem real woke, at least a lot of them that are in my classes. I'm sure that there are a lot of them that are not woke, but they certainly seem more open to the idea that men should be allowed to express emotions, that they can express their masculinity in different ways, that there's not just one way to do that. And that, they have a role to contribute, and that women are just as, equal than they are. And I'm not, I don't know that I was raised with that, but tell me what your perceptions are.
Yeah, I wish that I could say that I think that the large majority of men my age are woke or well aware of social issues, but from what I've seen, we have a lot of work to do. I've met some incredible men who really do hold themselves accountable and educate themselves in the ways that they need to. But I think asking what a man's job is in the feminist movement is kind of been somewhat brought to light with Black Lives Matter and other issues of racial injustice, and asking what is white people's responsibility in this position. And then we say, we don't want the responsibility to be on the oppressed group to have to educate us. We need to educate ourselves because we are the people doing the oppressing. Mm-hmm. We are the dominant group. And I think that has been highlighted a lot in the last few months, and still needs to be, and white people need to do better in that sense. But that applies also to men and the feminist movement. And that's where I think part of my ideology of I don't owe you anything and I shouldn't have to teach you how to respect me, is that you should be teaching yourself how this is messed up and how other people are being treated differently than you are. So I think that men are incredibly responsible. They're in a position of power, and they should use that to benefit groups that are being oppressed the same way that I should be using my privilege as a white person in that way. And I think that, you have, again, that choice that you have to make, and it is an active decision to be empathetic and moral, or in my opinion, selfish. So I think that, there is a decision to make there, and that all men have a huge role to play.
Yeah, I think you said that perfectly. I believe a lot of problems with men I encounter is that they just have no idea. Like, they have no idea what's going on in a life other than their own. And I don't say that, I don't think I'd mind like having the conversation or educating them or doing the work even, but I feel like a lot of them aren't willing to listen. And of course that's not every man at all, but I find a lot that like men don't understand why women are scared to pump gas at night, or like go to the grocery store by themselves, or these kind of things, and feel like we're just being dramatic or weak, when really like our weakness is really just a product of your oppressing us, And I feel like if they were willing to listen and really understand that, then a lot of things would change. I find a lot when I talk about rape culture and like the problems of being a college female on a college campus, and like how that can be concerning sometimes. I always get met with the response, even from woke guys a lot of the time, right? Oh, well, women like report rape too when it doesn't happen, like false reporting is a problem. I'm scared that somebody's going to tell on me, whatever. Like, why are you in a situation where you think the lines are blurred to where someone may say that you did that? Like, I don't, like, if you weren't in a situation that's blurry or gray, I don't think that you should be concerned. And if you were in a situation like that, now we need to have a conversation about consent, because that's concerning. And I don't like when that's the automatic response, because you have this extremely large amount of women who are raped on a college campus. I mean, every woman I know, it's either her or a friend, and that's sad. That's pathetic. That should not be the case. And so when you have an issue that big, and then you have men who don't know anyone that's ever went to jail over something they didn't do, but they always meet with that response. And I feel like that's a problem. I don't think we need to fight each other of like, who has the worst problem, who's the most oppressed. I think sometimes we just need to sit down and listen.
Yeah, I like that. We have a perfect question to wrap up with that Jensen posed. And the question is, if you could sum up the meaning of fourth wave feminism in just a few lines, what would you say? And I think this is a perfect conclusion for our chat. So take a minute and think about it, because I know it's a lot. It's a lot.
I mean, some of the base terms, my brain goes directly to intersectionality, radicalism, rights for all is an ACLU slogan that I think is straight up to the point. Yeah, I think that is really a huge focus, is just let's talk about the people that have not been talked about. Let's hold people accountable. Let's do the work. And yeah.
And I would say equity is better than equality. And I find myself saying equality like instinctually a lot, but we need to move past equality and towards equity.
All right.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. A lot of people don't, I think we say equality because a lot of people are kind of confused with like, what does equity mean in terms of whatever we're talking about? But I agree with you. If we can all just kind of get there, we'll be a little bit better off educating the public about what we need regarding gender, economics, racial issues, and what have you. So I just want to thank both of you for joining us. You're both very inspiring.
Yep.
You too.
As well. Thank you so much.
And mention, we've talked about Race a Good Big tonight. So we're going to actually be having a special focus on Black feminism 2 weeks from tonight. So we'll be having some folks join us. And so thank you guys. It's Women's History Month. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on Gen Z and fourth wave feminism. And this has been an awesome discussion. And thank you guys.
Bye. Have a good night.
All right, y'all have a good night.
Bye.